Morning. I've lit my candle. We are currently a few days before the dark new moon cusp in almost the mid-spring, kind of like actually we're halfway between spring equinox and mid-spring. So I thought I'd get this video out before we actually get to mid-spring so that we can have opportunities to get whatever supplies you might need. I'm going to put our candle out of camera. This morning we're going to work with a handcraft called a Ladanka, and I'll explain a little bit about a Ladanka as we go along, and maybe I'll show you my personal Ladanka. I have a few actually. So Ladanka is the singular, Ladanki is the plural, excuse me. So this is a little satchel. I've made mine out of leather. I will make another one as we work today. I wear mine around the neck. A ladanka can be worn around the neck or could be worn on one's belt or sash, or could be put in a pocket or a purse. It doesn't necessarily have to be neck worn. Neck worn is just sort of convenient, easy to slip on and slip off. And perhaps I'll say a little bit about the mid-spring rites before we get into talking about this. So at this particular time of year, we actually wouldn't necessarily be doing handcrafting. Well, I guess it depends on where you're living. Right now, where I am, the snows are finally melting. I have never lived in the Northwest Ontario. I've always been down in a snow belt in Ontario, or I've spent quite a bit of time on the West Coast where I had very little snow. So to be in Northwestern Ontario with this length of winter is really unusual. I'm a little bit stir crazy. With this time of year, if there's no snow on the ground by the time we meet the mid-spring cusp, then we would be packing up in earlier days. We would be packing up all of our weaving, and we'd be packing up our spinning equipment. We'd be packing up even our embroidery equipment, and maybe keeping a few things out in case we have to do a sudden mend of a piece of clothing. But other than that, all of the handcrafting would go to the side, because then the energy and the wheel of the year would have us shift into doing all of the work of preparing the gardens, doing the rituals and rites to open the gardens, to open up, working with the fields and with the animals out to pasture, etc. And so the idea would be that that, you know, the time of handcrafting, which is for the season of darkness, which is half the year, that's to be put aside. Now we're opening up the season of light, and in fact, around what we would say today as being the mid-spring time would be the beginning of the season of light, and that would go until the mid-autumn. So opening up and welcoming fertility and welcoming vitality and calling in growth and hoping for a good balance between sun and rain, and all of the songs that one sings to empower that, and all of the rites that one does to welcome that. So the pasunki that we made during the spring equinox, there would be certain pasunki that are made that would be gifted to the garden, to the earth, and to the if you are a keeper, a natural beekeeper, then to the bees, and etc. And you could just go on and on. So what am I saying with this? Well, it's not that all handcrafting is completely ignored during the season of light. There are, again, rites that one would participate in, and we'll do those as we go through the summer and the midsummer rites. However, having said that, a lot of this kind of sewing craft, unless it was functional would be put aside. So this will be sort of our last kind of sewing craft until we get to the autumn, or something that we're working with a textile for. We're going to make a Ladanka. What is a Ladanka? Well, the satchel, but understanding the actual meaning and importance of a Ladanka means that we kind of have to go through layers of history. You see, when I start working with different handcrafts and talismans in particular in the Ukrainian lore, oftentimes when I first start researching it, I'm going to come across the more recent layers of history, and then I have to decode and uncover and decode and uncover what it is that I'm finding as information. Ladanki don't have a lot written about them. There is some out there, and I've been able to find what I can. I'd love to be able to find more, and I'll continue my search to find more information. What I understand about it today is that it is something that the church has adopted, and you're going to find this with pretty much all of the talismanic crafts. Why is that? Because in the late 900s, when Christianity fully encountered the Slavic lands, what was the main practice among the Slavic peasants was paganism and earth-based practices. And so when Christianity reached the Slavic lands, they had a very difficult time trying to convert the peasant class to the Christian faith. The aristocracy was more easily converted. They were more happy to make that transition. The peasants, however, probably because of their very direct relationship with the earth and their very direct work with the earth, really didn't want to give up their faith, and in fact, it was quite violent in their expression of not wanting to give up their faith. So, I mean, this happened over several, probably, I would say, centuries. This adoption. But what ended up happening is that the Christian practitioners began to adopt, as a way of being able to convince the peasants to convert to Christianity, they would adopt the practices and the rites, here I mean like seasonal rites, of the pagan and earth practitioners, and absorb it into the Christian doctrine, and then assign new figures. Instead of, for example, a deity, there would be just the rite for that particular time of year, or the practice, or even some of the handcrafts would be assigned different saints, different meaning, or different dates that were close to or mimicked the earth-based practices, but was enough to convince enough people to begin to migrate into Christian belief systems. And in fact, what we would call people who were allowed to continue to practice some of the earth-based traditions along with the Christian practices, we would call that dual faith. So, Ladanka. Ladanka was one of those things that was absorbed. So today, what you'll find when you research the word Ladanka is that the majority of what's going to show up are little lockets. They look like lockets that people would wear. They're usually made out of metal, and they often will have icons, Christian icons on the front of it, or they may have some symbol. They might even be plain, but oftentimes they'll have something that identifies it as a Ladanka that is of the Christian faith. And when one opens it up, it's, when you first get it, it's going to be empty, or it might contain something in it, but it's the idea is that you put something inside of it, and oftentimes what's put into it is either a written prayer or a piece of scripture, or you might have a little piece of incense that's put inside of it, or a relic. Why incense? Well, incense is actually an interesting part of the story of Ladanka. So back in the times when Ladanki were not yet a part of the Christian church practices, a Ladanka would contain various substances. One of the substances that it might contain is incense. And I'm not going to go into the long history of incense, but you can see why with my own business I'm attracted to working with incense. It's not because of some other, it's just fun to have nice smelling stuff. No, actually, I became interested in incense because of my interest in the history of Ladanki, and also the practice of Kyriwati, which is the burning of herbs for self-cleansing or fumigation, not just of the self, but actually of a space, or to one of the times that one would burn herbs or use incense would be, for example, if you wanted to ensure that your cattle, your cows in particular, would produce enough milk. You would go and fumigate them at the very beginning of the spring, working with the herbs and the smoke, to make sure that they will be sloughed off of any of winter's kind of heaviness, or any perhaps curses that might have been thrown your family's way or toward your land. And so working with the smoke is one way to help clear it, and then to bring in a prayer or to a blessing with that smoke once the clearing is done. So incense was one of those things, or herbs that you would burn were one of those things that people related to as helpers to ward off illness, to ward off negativity, to ward off curses. And in the derogatory sense of the word, they wanted to ward off any witches. Now, again, we're going down a whole lot of rabbit holes. So I can have, again, another long conversation about witches and the word vedma. There are many different words for the different magical practitioners, or wise people practitioners, or healers in Slavic lands. It actually is more regional, depending on which region you go to. People will be assigned different words, but some of the words that you might hear are Jnakarka, Mulfarka. These are all of the feminine versions. Mulfarka, Pasorka. You might hear Baba. It just means grandmother, but the grandmothers are the wise women. They were often assigned the role of being a healer, being the midwives, being the counselors, etc. I cannot think of other names right off the top of my head. I'm probably certain I could probably find a few more. The whisper healers. I can't remember the word for them. Anyway, so incense would be used and worn in your ladanka around your neck to help ward off anything that might be thrown your way. You see a lot of people really strongly, even today, still believe, well, I shouldn't say even today, many people still believe and understand the negativity that can be thrown their way by somebody's ill thought of them. I want you to think about this for a second. Maybe there's somebody you've had an argument with. It might be your partner or a good friend, and the two of you just like really went at it, and you started telling them that they're an a-hole, or thinking really mean thoughts about them, right? Oh man, I can't stand that person. I wish they would just go blah blah blah. Well, what are you doing? You're taking all that negativity and you're wrapping it around them. basically. You're wrapping it around them. You're throwing negative darts at them. We're sensitive creatures. We can actually sense and feel when something's off. You know that so saying, "Are your ears burning?" Right? We know it. We know. We can feel. You can say it. Maybe it's along with quantum fields. I don't know, but the idea is that we are sensitive energetically. We can feel these things. So incense was one of those ways to be able to ward off some of that negativity. You know, the interesting thing in Slavic culture, which I really, really appreciate and love, just because of my own interest in the field, is all of like almost everything was basically an amulet or a talisman. So the embroidery wasn't just pretty. It actually, all of the symbols, the intention, the prayer that was put into all the various stitches, those had meaning as protection, as calling in wealth or calling in love, as warding off different things. The pisanki, the working with the weaving, working with things like Ladanki, working with the rushnik, everything had a very specific intention and purpose. So I also I found this in a thrift store, this little cat's eye. I love it. I fell in love with it as soon as I saw it. A little bit like the warding off the evil eye, you know? That's why I like to wear it. I love cats, so I've attached it to my Ladanka. That's just a personal thing. It's really rare that you would actually see this because, for the most part, when one wears it, one doesn't wear it on the outside of their clothes. The idea is that one is to wear it hidden, right? So I wear this on the outside for a very specific purpose right now. I'm not going to talk about that right now. But the Ladanka itself would be worn on the inside. So I'm going to take it out so that we can still talk about it and I can show you a little bit about it. Incense is sometimes carried in the current day Ladanki. At that time when the church was trying to convert the peasants, and we have the dual faith that was being practiced, the associations of the church use of things like frankincense in the censors, you know, and they're rocking it as the priests walk down the hallway in the church, and the smoke is billowing out. Well, a lot of folk actually associated the church use with the old pagan and pre-pagan, pre-Christian practices of working with burning of the herbs or incense, thinking that it probably meant the same thing, when in fact it didn't. Like if you speak with a priest and ask them about the wearing of the incense, they're not going to talk about it warding off things as if it in and of itself had magical power. What they might say to you today is that the incense is just there for you to burn, but it's not that it has magical power per se. It's that all of the things that you're attributing to the incense have to actually be owned within the self and practiced within the self. So the older beliefs, which were both animistic and also some of it magical thinking, were also based on this idea of amplification and resonance. And I don't think that the church sees eye to eye with those particular beliefs. So amplification and resonance, what does that mean? So if there's an herb that we know that you can take internally to help with an illness, maybe it has certain properties, antifungal, antibacterial, maybe it's a bitter, maybe it's a sweet, and we know that we take them for different conditions, then the idea was if you wear it, you're in resonance with that medicine. It's not that you don't need to also take it in terms of a tea or a food. You would still do that. But wearing it also helps our body to remember the signature of that medicine, and also amplifies in that signature, that resonant way, amplifies the power of that medicine that we've taken internally, and now we're wearing it on our body or our being. Then there are things that we would wear that we're not going to be like herbs that we would be ingesting for illness, but we might be working with an herb as what it represents symbolically. Like if you have a plant that has spikes on it and you're seeking to protect yourself, maybe from somebody's maliciousness or their rude comments or whatever, then you might take that spiky stem and put it inside your Ladanka. And again, it's symbolic, but what it does is it helps to remind you on that subconscious level, hey, I'm protected. I have truth on my side, or I walk with the knowledge that I will be protected, that there will be helpers who will come to help me. And then within the animistic practices, acknowledging that each thing is inspirited, has its own consciousness, means that you are appealing to the consciousness of the animal, the substance, the plant, etc., that you might be carrying with you in your Ladanka. So there may be things like teeth, claws, fur, bones that you might carry in a Ladanka. A common thing that would be worn in a Ladanka would be soil. So the relationship of the folk who practice either paganism or earth-based practices, the relationship they have with the soils, that the soil is a representation of the land, Mother Earth, the place where you were born, the place where your ancestors exist, where they were buried, the place where the placentas are from, and reminders of where your spirit belongs, what you've been made of, the soil that you've been birthed out of and made of. Soil is considered to be cleansing, life-giving, supportive, and in some cases medicine. Sometimes it would actually be used as medicine. For people who had to travel far from home, maybe they were going to battle, or maybe they were traveling for other reasons, for trade, etc., they would carry soil in the Ladanka with them, so that if by chance they fell ill on the road or were attacked, if they died far from home, they would at least have their soil with them. They could be literally buried in a sense. They could be buried in the soils that birthed them, or with the soils that birthed them. So carrying soil would be considered protective, but also a reminder. And so that brings us, kind of full circle to our intention for making our Ladanki for this mid-spring rite. What I'll encourage you to do, even if you're not going to do it the entire time, let's say that you're working with your Ladanka, at least for perhaps a season, or even just a lunation, one lunar cycle, carry soil in your Ladanka. Now you need your soil to be dry, because you don't want the fabric or the leather that you're making your Ladanka out of to start to get moldy or have fungus on it. So dry out your soil and then place it inside your Ladanka and carry it with you. And notice how you feel carrying soil that you feel connected to in your Ladanka. Which means that you'll also need to find soil that you feel connected to. It might be soil from a birthplace. Maybe you've been living in the same region or territory all of your life. Maybe you've been living in an area that does not feel homish to you, but there is like a particular park that you feel deeply connected to. So you might go there to gather some soil. Or maybe there's a river, and along the shoreline you could gather, just all you need is like a tablespoon's worth that you can bring with you. Now, before you dig in the earth, it's very, very important that you ask the earth if this is okay. Wait and feel in your body, or hear in your inner ear, or receive just a download. Is there a yes or a no? Before you dig into any soil, if you haven't already, introduce yourself, introduce your ancestors, introduce your reason for being there, introduce your intentions, and always, always, always leave an offering. Bring something that is a gift for the earth. It could be that you're gifting water back to the earth, or herbs back to the earth. That's probably best because you're taking soil, presumably, if you get a yes. You might give back some herbs to the soil. They'll help regenerate the soil. There'll be gifts back to the soil, or something else that has meaning like that. Eggshells that you've crushed, gift it to the soil. Soil will be happy to receive the minerals. So think creatively in that way. So let's get started. I'm going to show you how I've made this one. So what we've got is a long strap. We also have a shorter strap, if I can get it untied. I tied it tight the other day, not thinking that I'm going to need to undo it as well. There we go. So like I said, I've made mine out of leather. So the things that the Ladanka were made from, that we understand from previous times, in the long ago days, were leather or woven wool. You'd have to have a tight weave to keep things like soil inside of it. So probably the woven wool was more likely used with larger substances. Or wood. There were some that they have found that were made out of wood, and they're like a little wooden box or purse that one would wear either on the neck, or you would, again, put it on your belt or in a purse or a pocket. So as you can see, what we have here is 4 sides. I have one medium length strap that is used to wrap around. And I'm going to show you how to make the pattern to make this Ladanka. Everything is attached at the bottom. You can see that there's just seams up the sides. It's all one piece that we will cut out. I will recommend that you find either a really thick fabric to work with, or leather, or something, just making sure our candle is still working, or something similar to start with. And we're going to make our pattern out of paper. So you would take a piece of 8.5 by 11 paper, fold it in half, cut it, or just rip it down the fold. And now this is half of a letter-sized piece of paper. I want to fold this to make a square shape. And I do that by taking one corner and folding it over to meet the opposite edge. And once I've done that, fold the top side This is a heavier paper, so sometimes the folding doesn't happen so easily. Fold the top side away. And you can just rip along the seam. I'm going to keep this a scrap. You know me, I keep all my scraps. So now we have a square. From this square, we need to make a pattern. So what's important to realize is that with the Ladanka, like I said, we have 4 individual sides that we will sew together and a common center. This is too big in and of itself to make the Ladanka. We have to size it properly. So I usually keep it folded in half, and I fold up one side and then the other side. And I'm actually going to adjust that a little bit. Excuse me for a second, because I want them to be even. There. I do not need a really wide bottom. You'll see that it's not folded all the way to the tip. It's folded almost toward the tip. Okay. Unfold. Repeat on the other side. So I had folded this like this. I'm unfolding it and now folding it in the opposite direction. When I open it, what I'm going to see now is what looks like a cross. You can't see it very well on the camera, but you'll see it in your folding. You'll see that you have, maybe you will, see how we've got one arm and then another arm, one arm and then another arm. I think that those are a little bit too thin for me today, so I'm going to cut a little wider than those, but those become your guidelines for what you're going to cut out. So because I find them a little bit thin, I'm going to make my cut slightly wider. All my little scoopy scraps of paper are going to become places where I keep notes, where I don't want to forget something. You have something that looks like a solar cross or like an earth cross, depending on how you want to orient it. You'll remember the significance of the earth cross and the solar cross from our work with when we make mutanki. So when you fold this up and match the sides together, what you end up with is a little container. And that's basically what we want to use then as a template for when we cut out our material. So now I'm going to lay this in a place where on my material I will make my cuts. Actually, before I do that, because I'm working with leather, I just remembered, I want to make sure that I have enough leather to make my ties. Now, I don't need a long piece of leather to make a tie because leather is malleable. So as long as you don't have the kind of leather that has a shiny finish on one side, but rather is more natural, you can do this next thing with it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut my ties first. So one tie will just be long and thin. Now you can make your ties out of anything. You don't have to have leather. You can braid some yarn together at the appropriate length or some string. You can make your own cordage. So you can decide what material you would like to use for your ties, your binding ties. So this is going to be the binding tie that goes around here. Now I need to make the neck piece. If you're choosing not to wear your Ladanka around your neck, but rather put it in a pocket, you don't have to have a neck string. I'm going to keep my scrap to the side. One of the things you can do if you are working with leather is that, sorry, I just have to cut a little to make it workable. Okay. Let me do that again. One of the things that you can do is to cut around corners to make a longer string. So you'll notice that I'm cutting along the edge. This is why I didn't want to cut out my pattern yet, because I'm actually taking part of the edge away. I don't want this to be too thin that the leather will break. I don't want it to be super thick either. Now when I get to a square corner, I'm going to make a round cut. I'm not going to leave the square corner, but I will show you what I'll do with it when I'm done making the length that I want to make. Now, leather stretches, so I'm going to give it a little stretch. I want to test and see how long it is. I want just a little bit more. So I'll cut it all the way to the end. Don't necessarily need it quite this long, but I'll work with it. So I have this funny thing that's sticking out. Once I've stretched it, all I need to do then is to cut it. Okay. That's actually the perfect length. Now we will figure out the best place for the Ladanka. I'm looking at this and thinking about not just what I'm cutting right now, but what I'm going to cut in the future. I want to maximize the amount of leftover leather so I can make other projects. I think this is what we're going to do. So once I feel comfortable with where I've lined it up, I'm going to use just a regular old ballpoint pen. And draw using my template. I'm drawing on the wrong side, what we call the wrong side. So the suede side of the leather is going to be on the inside of the bag. That's why I'm drawing on it. It won't show. If I draw on the other side and my pen slips, I'm now ruining the side that's going to show. So I'm drawing on the wrong side. Whatever the wrong side of whatever textile or fabric you're going to work with, that's the side you want to draw on. Oops. The edges of my paper are rolling up while I'm trying to draw. Okay, you can probably see that. Yes, no, maybe. Great, now I'm going to cut it out. Any small adjustments we need to make, we can make them later. And just like with fabric scraps and threads and strings, yes, I keep all of my scraps, especially leather. I want to honor especially the animal whose life contributed this leather. And I can do that in part by saying thank you to the animal and also making use of every single bit and piece. So one of the things you can begin to think about is, like, aside from soil, what would you like to carry in your Ladanka? Is there a particular plant, herb, root that you feel either kindred with, or that you already work with as a medicine? Perhaps you have a particular reason that you're working with it as a medicine. Maybe you found a snake skin in a field when you were walking, and right now you're going through a lot of change in your life, so you might carry the snake skin in your Ladanka as a representation of transformation. Maybe there's a special word you're working with as an intention or a phrase, or maybe there's a prayer you're working with. Do you want to write that prayer onto either a piece of fabric or a piece of paper and roll it up and carry it inside your Ladanka? Maybe, excuse me, oops. Maybe there's something that you want to bring into your life, attract into your life. Maybe you're thinking about where you'd like to live in the future, or the qualities of a partner that you'd like to attract into your life. So maybe you want to write those onto a paper and carry it in your Ladanka near your heart. Or maybe there's qualities inside of you that you want to amplify and work with. Peacefulness, kindness, openness, whatever it is. And again, you can carry that with you. Or maybe you want to bring your ancestors closer to you. And so perhaps you will put something in there that represents your ancestors. Maybe it's a piece of jewelry from one of your grandmothers, or maybe it's simply the names of your known ancestors, or the lands where your ancestors came from. You can choose whatever it is you want to carry in your Ladanka. Take time while you're making it to really think about what its purpose will be, because as we sew it, that's going to be imbued into the Ladanka. So now you have your piece of fabric, you have your 2 ties, and what you're going to need is to get some good thick thread. Now, if you don't have really thick thread, this is thread that one would use for making jeans. It's that kind of really thick, heavy-duty thread, and I'm going to use that to sew mine. And I'm using gold as a color because I really like the way that it looks with the leather that I've chosen. You'll probably have questions about where I get the leather, so there's a few different sources. One is I go to thrift stores and find leather jackets that I can make use of for leather. Sometimes I've been gifted it. My mom has gifted me beautiful leather. Sometimes I find in thrift stores leftover scraps from somebody who's been doing their own handcrafting, and so I'll make use of those as well. It comes from a few different places. I don't have tons of leather. I have just a few supplies that I work with, and not often, because it's very precious. And again, I really want to honor those who have given their lives for it, and all those who have. I do prayer work with them in honor and in gratitude. So get yourself some thick thread, and if you don't have really thick thread, you might use the thread that you have but double it. So rather than putting only 1 thread through the hole, put 2 threads through the hole, and make sure that they're equal length, same length. And depending on the material that you're using, if you have something like a thick or even a thin leather, you can use a sharp needle, and not just sharp like pointy, but it's called a sharp needle. That's the kind of needle. Sharp needles are pointy and they have a small hole. I would not use an embroidery needle, or you can use a leather needle. Leather needles have sort of a triangular prism at the tip, so it actually pierces through the leather, and those are a good option as well. Unfortunately, all of my ones that are, oh no, I have some smaller ones. Well, I'm going to start with a sharp needle, and if I find that it's not working for me, I might change my needle and work with one of my leather needles. I just find that my leather needles tend to be a little bit wider, and so they make almost like too big of a hole. We're going to see how we do. And depending again on the kind of fabric that you are using, you will probably want to have a thimble, because the thicker the fabric, the more stubborn it is, and your fingers may not agree all the time with your needle, meaning that the needle might pierce you while you're trying to push it through a thick fabric. I might have used too small of a needle. Yeah. So ideally you have a needle that is the same width as your thread. So that the hole that the needle punches into the fabric allows your thread to pass easily through. If your thread is really thick and your needle is thin, then you can get your needle through the fabric, but then when you go to pull the fabric, the thread through, it gets stuck and you have to pull really hard and yank. And what that does is that it wears down. See where the thread meets the needle? Right here. It wears that down, and then it will break in the middle of your sewing project. So you want a thick enough needle that doesn't happen to your thread. Now I'm doing a double knot. I'm knotting the thread at the end. And what I've done is I have my thread doubled. I always work with a double thread. I just really want to make sure that my projects are well put together and aren't going to fall apart. And I have a knot at the end. I'm going to show you how I start this. We're marrying two sides together, and you're going to start at the bottom and work your way to the top. Okay, so you're going to start at the bottom on the common where they are joined together and work your way to the top. So at the very bottom, I'm going to insert my needle just at that little V. I'm going to pull it through, but I'm not going to pull it all the way through. Okay, so I have a little tiny tail sticking up. I don't know if you can see this. Okay. I'm going to put my needle in between the two threads and catch the knot. You see that? I caught the knot. Pull it through, okay, and tighten. What that does is it means that my knot is not going to pull through. It's cinched in place. Now I will put the two sides together, and we're going to do either a whip stitch or a blanket stitch. If you know a blanket stitch, go ahead and work with it if you feel that that's the kind of stitch you want to show on your Ladanka. I'm probably going to work with a whip stitch just because. I do blanket stitches in other projects. This one I want to have a little bit tighter, so I'm going to work with the whip stitch. And what's a whip stitch? I'll show you after I do a couple of stitches so you can actually see. I'll describe it as I'm doing it. I'm inserting the needle on the side of the leather that's closest to me, and I'm pushing it all the way through. And then pulling the thread I'm going to make one more stitch, pulling the thread tight. I'm going to make another stitch. Try and make your stitches even in terms of distance so that it will look neat and tidy. Push it all the way through. My thread is getting all tingly. There. Pulling it all the way through, tightening, and then I'm going to show you an up close. Hopefully you'll be able to see this. That's one side, that's the other side. And you're just going to continue this all the way up the length. So you'll probably see the video gets sped up because you don't want to sit here in real time with me. And I'm going to be taking my glasses off because I sew better up close without them. Okay. So I've reached the end. This is what it's looking like. I've reached the end, and how do I finish off at the very top? Well, so one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm just going to stretch it a little bit, see if it looks tight on the inside. It does. Tight stitches. Then if I'm satisfied with how they're looking, my very top stitch is going to be in the same hole I just made. I'm going through the same hole I just made a second time to reinforce it. And then I'm going to make it look pretty. And how I do that, to tie it off so that it stays bound, is I make a series of knots. So where the thread has emerged, I've put my needle through. I've put my needle through, here's the stitch, I've put my needle behind the stitch, between the stitch and the leather. So again, if you can see it up close, I hope. I'm going to push the needle through. As I push the needle through, here's the thread. I want to now thread the needle through the loop and pull tight, and make sure that all of the ends are pulled tight. Okay. That's one knot. I've made one knot. I'm going to go and make knots along the entire stitch that I made, that last stitch, from one end or hole across the top over to the other hole. That means that I'll probably have to make several knots as I do that. So here's my second knot, same thing. Put the needle through between the thread and the leather, pull, and thread the needle through the loop, second knot. Because of the thickness of my thread, my third knot actually lands me at the top where the two pieces of leather join. Loop it, tie the knot, and keep going. Sometimes your thread gets kind of twisted, so I just take a moment and I untwist it. So it looks like it'll take 6 knots for me to cover the whole length of that stitch. Maybe even 7. I think I can squeeze 7. There's 6. Here's the 7th. That'll be my last knot. Okay. So rather than just clipping the thread at that point, See, I have knots now. I have knots that go along that last stitch from the place where the thread emerged all the way to where I had inserted the needle. Now what I'm going to do, instead of just clipping the thread off there, I'm going to thread it back through the hole. And very close to it, I'll thread it again, not through the same hole, just a millimeter below, making a new hole. Just barely, like maybe even the width of my thread. It's getting really tight. It's having a hard time going through. So for those of you who work with thick fabric like jean fabric or leather, I sometimes use needle nose pliers to help me. There. Lovely. Now I can snip my thread. You've completed one side. You have 3 more sides to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to join back with you once you've completed those 3. I'm going to put the video on pause. It'll automatically jump ahead when I've completed those 3 so that we can do the next part. You can put yours on pause as well and join back with me when you've completed those 3. Okay, so here we are. So I'm on the very last step of my last side, which is to push through. I wanted to give you a second to kind of gather yourself. Hopefully you are complete. I'm almost complete. By the way, I remembered the name of the whispering healer that I was trying to remember before. It's Tucha. I don't know how to pronounce it properly. Tucha, I believe is how it said. Whispering healers. Did I mention Voroshka? Maybe I didn't, the fortune tellers. Anyway, lots of different specialties. Oops. Well, and sometimes that happens. I went through the same hole twice. I didn't mean to. So we'll try that again. Once, definitely make it a few millimeters away. Twice. Okay. So now what you're going to need is the smaller binding tie, the one that goes across and closes the bag. If you're using something that's braided or if you're using a piece of leather, the first thing that's a useful thing to do sorry, I'm just tying off my thread, is to stretch it a bit, even if it's braided. Okay, make sure it's nice and stretched to length. Then you're going to look at your Ladanka as it is now and decide which side is going to be the front of your bag and which will be the sides, because it folds a particular way. So when I fold this, the sides pinch in. So if you can see that, the sides pinch in. And from there, one side will be the front face and one will be the back face. And I think this is going to be my front face. So it means that my binding tie will be sewn on the back face. So sides folded in, back face, front face. I'm going to sew my tie on the back face. It's going to be sewn across. So what we need to do first is decide where is about the center of the tie, and place the center of the tie not right at the very top of the Ladanka, but about a ½ inch down, a centimeter down. We're going to use that same whip stitch, but we're going to make the whip stitch really close together, like one against the other, to lock it in place. So you'll have to have the bag, the Ladanka, open and use your non-dominant hand to hold the tie in place where you want it to be while you make your very first stitch. My first stitch is actually in the tie itself and not in the bag. I go through the back side of the tie. I've already got my knot in my thread. And the reason that I'm doing that is so that my knot is hidden. I don't want it to necessarily show. And I just make sure that the knot is tucked into the back. I mean, it doesn't matter if your knot shows. It's not really going to show. If you're working with leather, you have to make sure that you're not just working at the surface of the leather when you do this next set of stitches, because it will actually rip the leather. You want to go deeper, if not all the way through the leather. I'm going to move this. You see that my needle is through the leather, okay? Because the knot is attached to my binding thread, when I pull it tight, it will now be attached to the Ladanka. Okay. So now it's attached. I'm going to do a whip stitch, which means that I'm just simply going back to where my starting place was, and I'm going to make a stitch right next to where, like right next to where I just stitched. Basically side by side. And I will repeat as I go along, about 1 centimeter to 2 centimeters, depending on how big you've made your Ladanka, of this kind of stitch, side by side. I'll show you in a second. I'm making a third stitch. It's getting tangled. Here we go. Thank you. Okay, so I've only done 3 stitches. I'm going to go, again, like I said, the length of at least 1 centimeter up to 2 centimeters, depending on the size of your Ladanka, to make sure that I really cinch this in place. I go all the way in one direction, and then if I have any gaps, I'm also going to go all the way back in the same direction. And I can fill in those gaps with my stitches on the way back. What I mean by a gap, it's the space between the 2 stitches that you can fill in. So I'm not sure what kinds of fabric you have chosen to make your Ladanka. Jeans is a good fabric to work with because it's a thick weave, so you'll have less things falling through the warp and weft spaces. You can work with canvas. That's another good one. If you have something like just a light cotton or hemp, just be aware that, again, of whatever it is that you happen to put inside the Ladanka, if it's small and grainy like sand, it will potentially begin to escape through the warp and weft, through the weave of it. So I'm going to do 2 more stitches in this direction, and then I'm going to switch and go back. Okay, so that was just me going in one direction. You can see there's lots of little gaps there. Well, those gaps are going to get filled in now. So I've now filled in all the gaps. You can see it goes fairly continuous all the way across. There's a couple ways you can finish this off. You can either do the kind of knotting that we did before at the ends of the sides. I don't usually do that. What I usually do is that I take my needle and I thread it underneath all of the threads that I just sewed, pushing it in a parallel line as the binding string underneath all of the threads. Because this is a very tight stitch, I'm not worried about it coming undone, especially if I hide my thread underneath all of the threads. Okay. And then I can just snip it. And again, it's left neat and tidy. So what we just did there was parallel to the bottom and top of the Ladanka. Now we're going to attach, if you're putting on the neck binding, we're going to attach it, but we're going to do it on the sides that get folded in. So remember that in the way that it folds together, these sides get pushed in. Well, along those sides, you're now going to place the tie for the neck. And you're going to repeat that kind of whip stitch, binding it in place. You want to make sure that the tie is not lower along the bag, but actually is not like way at the top tip of the bag. I usually lower the end of the neck binding to the same level. The end of it is at the same level as my tie. Okay. So what we just did here with that whip stitch, one over the other, is the same thing you're going to do there. When you've completed that, make sure that whatever you're working with is not all completely twisted, but is flat, and do the other side. And we're going to rejoin each other when you've completed that and when I've completed that. Okay, so one neck side, the other neck side. We're going to take a moment and just do a little bit of smoke for the bag. Okurioti is the verb of fumigation. Okuriwanya is the smoke itself. Travami are the herbs. So a little bit of smoke into the bag, on the bag. I'll put that to the side. And so how we tie the bag is you push the sides inward and fold, and then use your leather binding or your string, wrap it around once or twice depending on the length of it, and just give it a little tie. And ta-da! So your task at this point is to do the work with the soil, to ask the soil, ask the land, ask the spirit of the land if it's okay to take a tablespoon of the soil. Make sure to dry the soil before you put it into the Ladanka. And then you wear your Ladanka out of sight. And I would suggest carrying the soil with you for at least one lunation, if not one full season. And see how you feel keeping the soils close to you. I really hope you enjoy your mid-spring.